Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. You know, the goodness and greatness of America is oftentimes under attack, especially from progressives and those revisionists that want to change American history. That's why I'm so excited about a new film and a book that accompanies it coming out by Dinesh D'Souza, America, Imagine a World Without Her. Dinesh D'Souza has been on this program many times before, has had career for many years, starting first as a former policy analyst in the Reagan White House. He has also been with the American Enterprise Institute and also the Hoover Institute. Author of so many books, going all the way back to some of his books, Illiberal Education, The End of Racism, The Virtue of Prosperity, and then some of the more recent ones, What's So Great About Christianity, What's So Great About America, Life After Death, and then the ones that relate very much to some of the conversation we're going to have today, The Roots of Obama's Rage, Obama's America. And of course, his film that came out a while back, 2016, Obama's America, and this new one, of course, America, Imagine a World Without Her. We have on the website a link to his website, DineshD'Souza.com, and also AmericaTheMovie.com. We have a trailer for you to watch. And Dinesh, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kirby, it's a real pleasure.
You know, it is great that you share a lot of your story in the trailer that I would encourage people to watch. Hit that share button and put it on their Facebook page or their blog or send it to someone else, because although we're kind of jumping to the middle of your book, it's certainly one of the themes in the movie, and that is, if you had stayed in India, you probably would have been maybe a doctor like your father, an engineer like your uncle, but your life was pretty much set. When you came to the United States, you were able to write your own story, and in a sense, that's part of the theme of both the book and the movie, isn't it?
It is. The movie and the book are written from an immigrant's perspective, but an immigrant who loves America and believes in the American idea. I still remember at the age of 17, the airplane descending on JFK Airport and looking outside and seeing Manhattan, seeing the Statue of Liberty. I knew somehow intuitively that my life would be different from that moment on, and it certainly has been. So I'm approaching the book and the movie with the perspective of somebody who has lived in another culture. So in that sense, I know a world without America. And I see America now both from the inside and from the outside. What I think is very remarkable today is that we have a movement to undermine America that is not coming from abroad, but is coming from within America. It's a movement in the name of morality and justice. It's this progressive movement, and Obama is a part of it, but he's only a part of it, and it's that movement that I take on both in the book. The book is out now, and the film, which comes out July 2nd.
You know, I have the book with me, and I've spent my time going through every one of the pages in the book, and there were some things that reminded me of some of your previous works. For example, What's So Great About America? You were really, in that sense, trying to defend some of the attacks on America, just as in What's So Great About Christianity, really are defending from some of the attacks from the new atheists. But I think we need this at a time when every time we turn around, every problem in America is attributed to our greed, to our racism, to many of the other things that you've written about in some of your previous books and even included in the previous movie, 2016.
Yeah, I think in the earlier work, certainly in What's So Great About America, I focused on the Islamic critique of America coming from outside. I also looked at this critique of America and tried to respond to it, but I never really understood what its motive was, because I noticed that what the progressives were doing, what they are doing, is they troll through American history. They leave about 90% of it out. They pick a series of facts that is calculated to support their thesis, and then they string them together to create a picture of what I call America the inexcusable.
Yes.
Their goal is the shaming of America, to take young people particularly and put them up against the wall and basically say, far from, feeling proud of your country, you should feel guilt about your country, and you should be ready to pay up because your country has accumulated its wealth at the expense of a whole bunch of victims both in America and around the world.
We're going to quote from all sorts of people today, Noam Chomsky, for example, and Ward Churchill. We're going to get into some of the things that Howard Zinn has written about, and certainly we're going to talk about Saul Alinsky. But I thought I'd put one more issue on the table before I kind of get into the book, and that is, this is a theme that runs through some of your movies and books, and that is the concept of anti-colonialism. Having grown up in India and being more aware of that, that certainly is one of the themes that runs through some of your writings and certainly surfaces in the book, and I suspect also in the movie.
Yeah, and certainly 2016 focused on Obama's anti-colonialism. Obama's father, Barack Obama Sr., grew up in Kenya, and he very strongly believed that the wealth of Europe was obtained through the conquest of third world countries like Kenya, like India, where I grew up. So colonialism, the anti-colonial philosophy argues that the wealth of the West is the result of theft. Now, interestingly, that idea is also at the core of modern American progressivism. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the progressive critique doesn't just focus on colonialism. It talks about how the early American settlers stole the country from the Native Americans, or how slavery was a sort of form of 250-year theft of black labor, or how America took half of Mexico in the Mexican War by force, constituting a kind of theft of land and territory. And then, of course, we hear from Obama how American capitalism, the free market system, is a form of theft which deprives people of what he calls their fair share. So it's theft, and more theft. And it's a kind of startling claim that the wealth of America, your wealth, mine, the stuff we have in our homes, is in some sense stolen. And if that's true, then the government, I guess, has the right to come and take it back.
Wow. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza. We have lots of information for you on the website and encourage you, first of all, to go to the movie. But even before so, we have a link to americathemovie.com. And we also have a trailer that gives you a little bit of a sense of what is in the movie, and certainly some of the things we've talked about here in this first segment are elements of that. And then, of course, we also have a link to Dinesh D'Souza's website so that you can find out more. This book that accompanies it is 270 pages. It is published by Regnery, and it gives you a lot more detail to the movie, and I certainly do encourage you to get a copy of that as well. We have that available in our POV store, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore as well. When we come back, though, I want to talk about The Tale of Two Frenchmen. Well done, just one of the many chapters in the book. Alexis de Tocqueville and then Michael Foucault. And I think you have kind of the two bookends, the point, counterpoint on how French have sometimes seen this. Then we're going to get into this concept of America the inexcusable and how, indeed, this is used to argue that the reason the United States and America generally has succeeded is because we have exploited others, we have stolen from others, and it really starts with sort of a fixed pie model rather than an expanding pie model, and recognize that the success in America is one that could be found in other countries as well, if they would be willing to learn some of the lessons that certainly we have Dinesh D'Souza writing about in his previous books and also in this new book, America, Imagine a World Without Her. The book, the film, all sorts of things we're talking about today here on Point of View. And when we come back, we'll talk about this tale of two Frenchmen, get into some of the critique, and I think you'll learn quite a bit today as we go into some of the ideas of those progressives who are convinced that our success really was upon the backs of the oppressed. We'll talk about that with Dinesh D'Souza right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
In February 2013, Dr. Ben Carson gave a speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. It has changed his life. He had spoken before at the National Prayer Breakfast when Bill Clinton was president. Although his speech then created a stir, nothing could prepare him for the response from his speech he gave with President Obama sitting a few feet from him. His new book has the title, One Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future. He understands the challenges of our growing debt and deteriorating morals, but is still optimistic. The subtitle of his book reminds us that each of us have a stake in America's future and can do something to make things better. Before he appeared on my radio program, I asked listeners to suggest questions they would like to ask Dr. Carson. I was struck by the significant number of questions asking if he believed that revival and reformation was possible, or whether America's best days were behind them. He still believes there is hope for this nation, as illustrated by the action steps at the end of each of his chapters. I also commended him for starting every chapter with a relevant verse from Proverbs. Not many people today, either leaders or lay people, start with Scripture in laying out the problem or the solutions for America. However, the founders of this country and the framers of the Constitution began many of their writings with an appeal to a biblical principle. Dr. Carson believes we are suffering from elitism and political correctness. We seem to have lost the ability to discuss important issues calmly and respectfully. He provides a good role model for this. He laments the increasing amount of division and demagoguery in our political culture today. He also sets forth a vision for the future and reminds us as a people who we are. And one of his best-known visions is for a wiser healthcare system. Dr. Carson rightly believes that America may once again be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza. Might mention that his film is coming out, and Gerald Molen, who is somebody we've interviewed before and certainly was the producer of the award-winning Schindler's List and also the creator of 2016 Obama's America, was also the producer of this as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how both Dinesh D'Souza and Gerald Molen have been investigated by the government. We'll get into that in just a minute. But let's, if we can, spend a few minutes, if we could, talking about the tale of two Frenchmen. I thought it was great the way you put these two different perspectives together, Dinesh. And we start, of course, with Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, coming from France, wondering why America was successful. What did he find?
Well, Tocqueville came to America in 1831. He traveled for 10 months, and Foucault came in the 1970s. So we can look at these two fellows as representing what I call the spirit of 1776 on the one hand, Tocqueville, and then the spirit of 1968. That's Foucault. Now, to start with Tocqueville, he came about 50 years after the American founding, so he could see the founding principles in action, and he noticed three very significant things. One, the pervasiveness of innovation and entrepreneurship. Americans are great inventors. They're always fixing things. They're coming up with new ideas. He saw that as a kind of entrepreneurial vitality. That's number one. The second, Americans are deeply religious, and Christianity, he said, isn't just private. It's not just stuff you do at home or in church. It infuses the way people cooperate with each other socially. It infuses the organizations they start, including their political activity. So that, he said, religion is the first of their political institutions. And third, he noticed that people like to get stuff done in cooperation with each other, but not needing the government. So here we see the three principles, if you will, of the founding. And all these three principles, sadly and ironically, are under fierce attack today. And they're attacked from this progressive movement And Michel Foucault, a Frenchman who taught at Berkeley, lived in San Francisco, he represents that spirit of the 1960s. And interestingly, with Foucault, it's not that he hated America. He certainly hated capitalism, and he certainly hated American foreign policy. But he said America represents to him, moral liberation, and specifically in his case, gay liberation. And so he said, I love America, but I love America not because of the Boy Scouts or the Little Leagues or the churches. I love America because I can do whatever I want in the Castro district of San Francisco, including, some very bizarre stuff in which, you take whips and chains and you become a master and somebody else is a slave and then you switch roles. This to Foucault was what's so great about America.
Wow. But again, it illustrates again that he was looking for freedom, but it wasn't based upon any kind of moral code. Now, there was a complete freedom from the moral code, whereas Tocqueville, for example, was very much like, say, an Edmund Burke who talked about the little platoons and recognized the importance of community, recognized the significance that churches had and families and all of the rest. So you have two diametrically opposed views that I think illustrate what America was and what America was becoming even when he arrived. But then it sort of fast forwards to some of those individuals today that are in positions of power, and they were very much influenced by Saul Alinsky. And, of course, you also spend some time talking about Bill Ayers. As a matter of fact, I talk about a debate that you did there. But the 1960s, and I love how you picked 1968, because in some respects that was sort of the end. That was a re-election of Ronald Reagan as governor, and certainly some of the changes were taking place. But those 1960 ideas were in the heads of individuals, and now many of them are in positions of power.
Absolutely right. Foucault, whom we started with, is kind of a cult figure on the American campus, considered one of the great philosophers of our time. Then there were other guys like Bill Ayers, and these are guys who started out as radicals and revolutionaries, but then later realized that a better way to do that is to become professors. So Bill Ayers became an educator. He's a very influential figure in elementary and secondary education. He taught at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And it's remarkable. Here's a guy who tried to bomb the Pentagon,
Yes,
like bin Laden. But, here he is, a respected professor with tenure, showing up at academic conferences and collecting a comfortable salary. And Alinsky is a very interesting figure because Alinsky is the guru, not only of Obama, but also of Hillary Clinton. It's remarkable. These two people who ran for the Democratic nomination in 2008 are both tutored by the same man. Hillary Clinton did her thesis on Alinsky when she was a student at Wellesley College, and Obama, who was born in Hawaii and then lived in Indonesia, but Obama kept going back to Chicago again and again and again. Why? Because that was the center of radical Alinskyite organizing. So it's very interesting. Our American history, it could be that we will pass the baton from one Alinskyite, Obama, to another, Hillary. And this is all part of what Obama calls the remaking of America.
Saul Alinsky, of course, wrote the book Rules for Radicals, and you talk about that in the book. But you do point out something that never really crossed my mind, and that is Alinsky always sort of assumed the radicals would be outside of government. The one thing he did not see, which Hillary Rodham, who then married Bill Clinton, and later, of course, Barack Obama were able to see is, wait a minute, we don't have to be on the outside, we can be on the inside. And so the rules for radicals that were really for the outsiders trying to bring down the government or the Cloward Pivens of the world or people like that did not, I think, anticipate that some of those individuals who were their disciples actually would be in the highest positions of power in America.
Now, this is a very important point, because Alinsky grew up in Chicago, and he came of age, he studied criminology, and in order to write his thesis, he began to hang out with the Capone mob. And he actually he became close to Frank Nitti, who was the number 2 guy in the Capone mob. And he admired all those people. He said, it's amazing how they're able to get money out of people by intimidating them and just basically pushing them up against the wall. And Alinsky thought, well, how do I do that without going to prison? How do I rely on shame and intimidation to get money and power? And he mastered the art of using things like, blocking people's entrances to offices and threatening them and so on, kind of the shakedown, if you will,
right,
to get money and power out of corporations and out of individuals. What Hillary and Obama figured out is there's a better way to do that. If you can take over the government, what better way to intimidate citizens than using the instruments of the state? You can use the FEC, the SEC, the NSA, the IRS. Then you basically have an unbelievably powerful weapon with which to target and essentially wipe out people who oppose you.
Just fascinating. All part of the book, America, Imagine a World Without Her, and, of course, also AmericaTheMovie.com. We have a link there as well. And just before we take another break, when we come back from the break, I do want to spend some time talking about the red man's burden, the issue of the Indians, the myth of Aslan and Mexico, and some of these others, and, of course, slavery. I did, while we're on Saul Alinsky, just again want to come back and point out the profound influence that he has had. He was, in a sense, an individual who was a mentor indirectly to the current president of the United States, Barack Obama. And as you pointed out a minute ago, Hillary Rodham, later Hillary Rodham Clinton, actually wrote her thesis on Saul Alinsky. So when people try to make the connection between Saul Alinsky and Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, it's a very clear connection. And some of your detractors sometimes say, oh, you're reaching, but I don't think at all. It seems to me that those ideas are being manifested before us today, even in some of the policies that we see.
You know, sometimes I read these books. I started out with Obama's book, of course, Dreams from My Father. Then I read Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. What's really interesting is right up there in one of the first pages, he says, well, this is a book called Rules for Radical. Well, we got to acknowledge the first radical. Who's the first radical?
Yes.
Lucifer, the devil.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting how he adopts the Lucifer strategy of using deceit to try to win over the people that you actually hate. Remember, Lucifer, of course, hated Adam and Eve, but nevertheless he came in a very charming guise to pretend to be their friend and essentially to seduce them over to sin so that they would then face damnation. Well, Alinsky's idea was that's what you do with the middle class. The American middle class is kind of innocent. They want to live up to their ideals. So what you do is you corrupt them. You essentially rub, as he put it, rub the sores of discontent.
Right.
You act as if you're an ally of the middle class, even though your long-term goal is to undermine middle-class values.
Wow. Rub raw the sores of discontent, one of the famous lines from Rules for Radicals. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about the argument that the United States' success is based upon the exploitation and oppression of the poor or of various indigenous groups, and we'll get into that as we continue our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza. We find this in his book and also in the new movie coming out, and we encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. Just before we take a break, though, we are coming to the end of our fiscal year. Ends on June 30th, and this is an opportunity for you to join with us. And in particular, we've been mentioning, and I thought I'd mention again today, that we have a few partners that have established a matching fund of $25,000, which means your gift is doubled. If you give to us right now, you can click on that button that says double your donation, $25,000 matching fund, and I would encourage those of you maybe that have never supported this ministry before, if you've ever wanted to give to this ministry, now would be a great time to do so. Your gift of $100 becomes $200. A gift of $500 becomes $1,000. So please consider what you might do to support this ministry. If you have been supporting Point of View, I hope that you might consider a special gift before the end of our fiscal year. You can go to the website, pointofview.net, or, of course, you can also make your check out to Point of View. Send it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. We'll take a break. We will continue our conversation with Dinesh D'Souza as we talk about America. Imagine a world without her. All that coming up right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this.
fight with all my life. Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza as we talk about America. Imagine the world without her. Dinesh, I want to focus some of our time and attention over the next couple of minutes looking at those arguments that we have exploited various groups. We'll look first, obviously, about Indians and the Indian Wars and those kinds of issues, and Native Americans, then maybe Mexicans and the Mexican War, and then finally slavery. But to begin with, in Chapter 6, you talk about the red man's burden. I've been in the United States longer than you have, and I can remember a time when Columbus Day was a real day of celebration. Now it's a day of controversy. And the argument you get from Charmaine Whiteface, a Ward Churchill, is that the success of America is due to the exploitation and the genocide against American Indians. How do you respond?
Well, first of all, there was no genocide at all. The white man brought with him from Europe diseases like tuberculosis and smallpox and malaria, to which the Native Americans had no immunities. And so there was, in fact, a great decline of the Indian population. It declined about 80% over the next century or so. But it wasn't due to warfare. Nobody killed them. These are people who just died because they became ill. Now, let's remember that there's a book called Plagues and Peoples by the historian William McNeill, and he points out that this has been going on all over the world since the dawn of mankind. I mean, the Black Plagues that spread in Europe, for example, in the 14th century, one-third of the population of Europe, the entire continent, was wiped out. Now, where did those plagues come from? Well, they came from Asia, and yet we don't call that genocide because it isn't. These are tragedies, but they're not genocide. Genocide means you actually intend or want to wipe out a people, and that was not the case here. The other thing to remember is that this exploitation, as you put it, this conquest ethic, if you will, was truly universal. It was going on everywhere. When the Europeans got to the Americas, they found all these Indian tribes occupying land. Well, where did the Indian tribes get the land? They took it from other Indian tribes. So for hundreds of years, long before Columbus, the stronger Native American tribes, like the Apache and the Comanche and the Sioux, would overrun the weaker tribes like the Hopi and the Shoshone and the Pueblos, run them off their land and take it. So, in a sense, what the Spanish conquistadors did in the Americas was nothing different than what had been going on here for centuries. What America represents, remember, America is 1776, right? That's 200 years after Columbus, is a very different idea, which is wealth obtained not by conquest, but wealth obtained by creating it through innovation and capitalism and trade, and that's the American idea. So America is being blamed for something that is not American at all.
One of the other things you point out, and we'll move on after that, is just to point out what was the mindset of some of the Indians. I mean, you have a quote here from Tecumseh talking about, get rid of the white race, completely destroy them. You talk about the Aztecs and how bloodthirsty they were. Sometimes we have in our history books today this idea of this idyllic time in which all the Indian tribes lived together, all the various groups up and down North America, all the way through Central America and South America, lived in this wonderful kind of halcyon society. But that really wasn't the case.
Well, it's a Western fantasy, and actually, to be honest, it's a little bit of a Christian fantasy because it's imagining, if you will, America as a Garden of Eden. It's almost as if some of the Europeans, when they saw these people who were naked and running around, they said, "Wow, this is probably the way that mankind was at the beginning." And so, this myth of the noble savage has been a very powerful idea in the West for several centuries now, but it represented a clear effort to misunderstand the Native American, to project onto the Native Indians properties and qualities that were not particularly theirs.
Well, we've talked about the Indians. Let's, if we can, talk about Mexico and the United States taking a very significant portion of Mexico. You call that the myth of Aztlan. Talk a little bit more about that, if you might.
This concept of Aztlan is the idea that the American Southwest really belongs to Mexico, even now. We interview a guy in the film, and he goes, "Don't tell me to go back to Mexico. I'm in Mexico." And so these are guys who believe that America is sort of illegally occupying all this land that was taken by force from Mexico. Now, this goes back, of course, to the Mexican War. The Mexican War broke out over Texas and over a border dispute. But let's remember that America actually conquered all of Mexico. American troops were in Mexico City, and the American flag was flying over the capital. Then America made a treaty, basically paid off Mexico's war debt, and retreated, giving half of Mexico back. Now, interestingly, all the Mexicans who ended up on the American side of the border were made American citizens. And so, ironically, they and their descendants now had rights of self-determination, the right to vote, the right to own property, and so on, that they would not have had they stayed in Mexico, because Mexico was essentially under a tyrannical government that had just broken loose from the Spanish. So the bottom line of it is, today you have Mexicans who are American citizens because of the success of the American war, and I bet you there are people in Mexico today who are trying to cross the border who probably wish, gee, if America had kept all of Mexico, we would now be U.S. citizens.
Yes, one of the things that runs through a couple of your chapters here is, would people like to go back to that situation? Would Indians like to go back and actually live in teepees on these various reservations? Well, the answer obviously is no. Would individuals that say, well, this part of Texas or Arizona is Mexico, would they really like to live under a Mexican government? I think most of them certainly enjoy the rights, privileges that are actually accorded to people that live in the United States. Which brings me to the third and final one before we move on to some other topics, and that is, we've talked about Indians, we've talked about the Mexican War, slavery. It's a big issue, but see if you can break that down for us, because again, you address that, and people like Howard Zinn and others certainly, I think, talk about how an incredible blot that is on American history, but you bring some perspective here that I think our listeners need to hear.
I think what's significant about slavery is that it's truly a universal institution that existed all over the world. In China, in India, American Indians had slaves. There was, of course, slavery all over Africa. So what is uniquely Western is the attempt to get rid of slavery, to abolish slavery. In fact, there is no anti-slavery movement outside of the West in the history of the world. Now, America is the only country to fight a great war to end slavery. The British were first. They got rid of slavery before we did, but they weren't a whole bunch of slaves in Europe. They were mainly ending the international slave trade. But there were a huge number of slaves in America, and America actually had to have a convulsive war in which 600,000 people died, including 300,000 Union soldiers who were fighting to secure for the slaves a freedom that the slaves were in no position to secure for themselves.
Now, if we can, maybe we could also talk about something else. We talked about the tale of two Frenchmen. There's a sense in which you could have titled one of your chapters, The Tale of Two African-American Leaders. One is Booker T. Washington, which we've talked about. The other is an individual that you've debated quite a bit on other occasions, and that is Michael Eric Dyson. Teaches at Georgetown University, and you have two almost diametrically different views from African Americans about America's culture, about racism, and about slavery.
Yeah, interestingly, Booker T. Washington was born a slave, so he experienced slavery directly. And yet his argument was that, look, ultimately in the long run, it's very important to have rights, but it is equally important to have the skills and the ability to take advantage of your rights. I mean, what's the point of being able to run in the Olympics and you get to start at the same line and the gun goes off and the clock goes on, but ultimately it's your running skill that's going to determine if you get the medal. What's the point of having the right to work, let's say, at Apple Computer or Oracle Software if you don't have the skills to be a programmer, you don't have what the job requires? So interestingly, there's a civil rights tradition, and Dyson represents this, and it's the tradition of agitate, agitate, agitate.
Yes.
So in other words, create political action to get rights. But Booker T. Washington represented a rival tradition, which was, in addition to getting your rights, let's make sure that African Americans and all other groups develop the cultural skills and abilities to take advantage of those rights. And I think that it's that tradition, the Booker T. Washington tradition, that is most urgently needed today.
I would agree. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to conclude our conversation today with Dinesh D'Souza. But if you just joined us, talking about not only his book, America, Imagine a World Without Her, 270 pages published by Regnery, but most importantly, a movie that you do want to see, and it has the same title. We have information about it on our website, americathemovie.com. Also have a link to Dinesh D'Souza. Most importantly, we have a trailer, and I would encourage you to watch it. Then hit that share button, and then you can put it on your Facebook page. Maybe if you have a blog, you can put it there. You can send it to someone else and really generate some interest about this movie that I think is going to cause you to really reevaluate some of the things that you have learned, certainly some of the things that others have learned in the public school system. And I think you will benefit, as we always do, from some of the great writing and film work that has been part of the experience of Dinesh D'Souza. We come back, we'll talk about the virtue of prosperity, the fact that we enjoy such liberty, and how you can use some of the resources we're making available to you to promote this and encourage others to question some of the assumptions they've made about American history, some of the ways in which they've adopted, sometimes even unknowingly, the philosophy and worldview of progressivism. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dinesh D'Souza right after this.
Now, back to Point of View.
your listener-supported source for truth.
Dinesh D'Souza with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his movie America, as well as the book America, Imagine the World Without Her. And I mentioned your chapter on the virtue of prosperity because in some respects you help analyze Adam Smith. In 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations and talked about self-interest and certainly an invisible hand and those kinds of things. But earlier, he'd also written a book called A Theory of Moral Sentiments, and being in graduate school, I had to read both of those books and talked about the fact that the point that you're making, oftentimes entrepreneurs, some of them may be very selfish, greedy, ambitious, but a lot of individuals, as they are seeking their own self-interest or even just doing the right thing in a market economy, bring all sorts of other people up. As rising tides floats all boats, and oftentimes these are selfless acts that give us the level of prosperity which today we enjoy in the United States and other countries need to learn how to emulate.
I think it's a pity that Adam Smith didn't, in a sense, combine the insights of the two books, because he gave the idea just from The Wealth of Nations that somehow selfishness is the driving engine of capitalism, and that that individual selfishness could, through the invisible hand of competition, lead to the material welfare of society. He also took a fairly dim view of businessmen in that book. But in the other book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, Adam Smith talks about altruism and empathy and putting yourself in the place of other people. And remarkably, those are qualities that make an entrepreneur particularly successful. If you are a car company, you've got to think about things like when a guy gets into his car, you know, he's busy, he wants to get to work, he wants to have a cup of coffee. Well, he needs a place to put his coffee cup. And ideally it's a place where it'll be the place where it naturally lands, where his hand descends. And so you've got to keep putting yourself in the place of the customer and the consumer to make products and things that are going to make their lives better. I think particularly of people who come up with things that people didn't even know they wanted. Overnight mail, Federal Express, or the guy who invented roll-on luggage. Think of the way that people lugged heavy suitcases for so many years, and no one even thought of putting wheels on the suitcases until someone said, look, I can make life easier for people by just sticking 4 wheels on it. It's not going to cost anything more, hardly, but it's going to make a huge difference in convenience. So entrepreneurs are always doing that. They're thinking about how to make other people's lives better, and that's what makes them successful. The more that they help other people, the more rewards they're likely to reap from it. So it's a system that in a sense, benefits everybody.
Well, certainly, and you've talked about Stephen Jobs, a good example of an individual who tried to figure out how to supply wants and needs of people, sometimes things they didn't even know that they needed. And in your chapter on liberty, you quote from one of my professors, Gene Kirkpatrick, Americans need to face the truth about themselves, no matter how pleasant it is. I love that turn of phrase, because in your book, I think a lot of people are going to say, wait a minute, if I accept everything that I read by Howard Zinn or by my secular professors or in these history books, I would think that America is a pretty evil nation. And yet, whether you mention this in your previous book, What's So Great About Christianity, or this one, America, Imagine the World Without Her, there are a lot of real positive stories that came out of this country.
Very much so. And I also think of how shallow the critique is when it's actually applied to a real case. So imagine Obama going up to Steve Jobs and saying, you didn't build that. Why not? Well, because Steve Jobs, some elementary school teacher, taught you math, and you used the public roads to get to your Apple offices. I mean, all of this would seem downright deranged. It would seem to make absolutely no sense. What Obama is really trying to do here, I think, is trying to detach effort from reward. He's trying to pretend as if somehow society, not Jobs, not Apple, created the iPhone. And therefore, Jobs, in a sense, owes society because he would not have been able to make what he did if it wasn't for this huge social infrastructure supplied by society. Now, look, no one denies that we need the public roads to get from A to B, but everybody collectively benefits from that. So I don't think Steve Jobs or anybody owes an additional obligation to society because they use the road same as you and me.
Well, lots of great insights in the book. Just before we ran out of time, though, I wanted you, Dinesh, to talk a little bit about the movie, the book, how people can use it, and certainly we would love to encourage as many listeners as possible to go and see the movies when it comes out in July, and most importantly, to get a copy of the book and educate themselves, their children, and their grandchildren about some of the myths that they've accepted from progressivism.
The book is very indispensable, and it's not only the intellectual spine for the movie, but it goes way beyond the movie. It's kind of a handbook, if you will, to be able to make, if you will, an intellectual and moral case for America and for the free market system. The film is special unto itself. It's an experience. It opens nationwide July 2nd. The book is out now, so it's available in bookstores or Amazon. But also look for the movie, because the movie is going to come out in a big way. It's a much better movie than 2016, because that was my first film, and I learned a thing or two along the way. So this will be a big film, and I'm delighted we have Lionsgate distributing it, so it'll be widely distributed around the country, and it's going to be a nightmare for some of these leftist progressives, because it blows the whistle on what they've been doing now for a couple of decades.
Just before I let you go, one of the cartoons you have in there is a cartoon where you have a picture of Barack Obama saying the arrest of Dinesh D'Souza for campaign law violations right after the documentary Critical of Me is just a coincidence. Not really. And you also in the book talk about your producer, Gerald Molan, who's never run afoul, and all of a sudden he was investigated. So how can our listeners be praying for you? Because I know you're in a very difficult set of circumstances right now.
That I would appreciate very much, because I think that this is underlying the political battle. There is also a spiritual battle that's going on in this country. It's not just about me. My case is part of a much bigger thing going on here. And I think it's a new low in American politics that we're seeing. I mean, I don't see Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton doing this kind of stuff, which is to say using the instruments of the state against their political opponents. This is the kind of thing I've seen in third world countries where people pull in the military to harass their opponents. But it's rather alarming to seeing it go on right now, right here in America.
Well, we certainly will be thinking about you and certainly are aware of some of your circumstances, but just delighted that the movie is coming out. The book is already out. I went through every single page, looked at all the pictures, and spent a fair amount of time in the book, and I would commend it to any of our listeners. And again, it is just one of many books that have been published over the years that are under the name Dinesh D'Souza. He has written quite a bit on so many different topics. You can't go wrong by reading any of his books. And Dinesh, always great to have you with us here on Point of View.
Really enjoyed it, Kirby. Thank you.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. But as you have heard us talking about this week, we certainly are encouraging you to do what you can to help us before the end of our fiscal year. It ends on June 30th. Really is critical that we end this fiscal year on a strong financial footing. And to know a little bit more about how you can get involved with us, here's more.
When a person has faith in God and believes he is responsible to him, that faith creates virtue. Virtue causes people to willingly obey the law. When the internal control of virtue is diminished, the outside control of government must increase to restrain the people. As government control increases, freedom decreases. As the power of government grows stronger, faith in a power higher than the government becomes an enemy of the state. The government will then seek to restrain faith to increase its power, and the cycle goes on and on. Will you help Point of View equip people to make faith an active part of their lives? Our fiscal year end is around the corner, and it's critical that we end the month of June with a solid financial foundation. A few of our key partners have generously created a $25,000 matching fund. So when you give during this critical time, your gift will be matched up to $25,000. I ask you to join us in this important work that God has called Point of View to do. Together, we can make a powerful difference.
Again, we encourage you to find out more about how to be involved with us. If today, as you were listening to Dinesh D'Souza, you were thinking, I never heard that before, or I want to get that book and read a little bit more about this. This is something that's challenging my assumptions. That's what we try to do here, really give you news and information and commentary that maybe you haven't heard in other places. And so, without apology, I really do ask for your financial support. As I've said before on this program, some of you maybe have listened to Point of View for a long period of time. Maybe you've benefited greatly from some of the insights, and yet maybe have never supported this ministry. Sometimes, Warren Kelly and I, we've said when we sat down with individuals that tell us how much they appreciate the program, we sometimes point out, as far as we know, you've never given just even one gift to Point of View. And they sort of look and go, I never really thought about that. And so let me encourage some of you that have benefited from this program to consider what you might do, just even to send a one-time gift, just as a way of saying, I'm out there, I'm listening to you, and appreciate what you're doing. It is a great opportunity for you because your gift will be doubled up to $25,000. You can give online to pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
across the nation. This is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
Religious freedom is under attack in our nation. America was once a city of light sitting on a hill, but that light slowly dims under a cloud of governmental control. And under this cloud, our freedoms erode one day at a time. And nations like North Korea, the former Soviet Union, or Mao's China show us the startling consequences of nations where religious freedom is crushed by widespread governmental control. Will you join Point of View to create a world where the light shines brightly? Our fiscal year end is around the corner, and it's critical that we end the month of June on a solid financial foundation. A few of our key partners have generously contributed to a matching fund of $25,000. So when you give during this critical time, your gift will be matched up to $25,000. I ask you to join us in this important time and contribute to the good work which God has called Point of View to do. Together, we can make a powerful difference.